me a hug. Welcome to the podcast. Rachel really wanted to kiss me before we started the podcast.
Saber's licking the bottom of my foot right now.
Where is she?
She's licking the bottom of my foot.
Oh. So today, we already did our podcast. By the way, if you guys are curious, like, well, Travis, why are your podcasts getting shorter and shorter and shorter? It's not that they're getting shorter. We're just trying to make them shorter. What?
That was the worst description I've ever heard.
You know what I mean?
Why are they getting shorter? They're not. We're just making them shorter. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
What were you thinking as the words were coming out of your mouth?
I honestly, what was I thinking? I was thinking of, because we just got a text message on here from, like, our family's WhatsApp, and I'm like, well, I wonder if there's new pictures of Rowan in there. So my brain was just, like, over here. My brain was over here, and my words were, like, right here. Anyways.
They're getting shorter because we want them to be shorter because I feel like a 30-minute segment is easier to listen to than an hour for a lot of people.
Even like a 15-minute segment wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah.
I think
20 minutes?
20 minutes is like the ideal time.
Yeah.
So if you guys are like, Travis, oh my God, no.
We also don't have the time to do 1 hour podcasts in a row today.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. So like I know the reason why we skipped last Sunday is not because we were lazy. It's just because we're lazy that day.
No, we were busy. We're
Just
gone.
kidding. It's because we were busy. Obviously, like, holidays and stuff. So yeah, I want to make sure we get you guys. Oh shit, I forgot to change the 9 to the 10. Let me just change it mid session.
Oh my gosh. High quality stuff. High quality stuff.
All right, so we'll act like nothing happened there. So everybody, if you're listening, nothing happened.
Well, listening, they would never have known.
Listening, you would never have known. Watching, you would have been like, oh my God, how could they do such a thing? So instead of doing so we obviously just had our format which we're going to continue on every time. But now we're going to talk
we had a new format we did last time, which we're going to use going forward.
Right. So which was basically so if you guys are curious about our format, once again, it's Q&A. If we have a guest, news, fact of the day, random fact of the day, story of the day, then review a show or something, and then we're going to jump in, and then we do our advice of the day, and then we talk about like how our previous podcast went, if we have anything to talk about for that. But today we have like a concrete topic that we want to just talk about. So sometimes we'll have this stuff, if we have like a bunch of jumble of like movies that we watched or something like that. So it'd be random,
Honestly, we make the rules.
You got it. So today, now we're going to be talking about anxiety.
The Anxiety Cast.
Anxiety Cast, yeah. So I'm sure a few of you guys probably know that, me and Rachel, well, Rachel more than I, but like...
Hey.
Well, yeah.
Not always.
Okay, not true. One, both have anxiety, like pretty bad sometimes. And I'm sure everybody else can kind of relate if you have anxiety yourself. So kind of just talk about it, where it stemmed from, like when did you start finding out that you had anxiety, blah, 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 blah. Maybe avoiding like some, heavy topics, but I don't know.
Right, let's get into it.
Yeah, I don't want to like spill the beans.
I'll spill my beans.
Yeah. But my anxiety is basically like, it didn't start until, I didn't really know what anxiety was until I was about 20 something. And that's when I started feeling anxious. And it was after like a certain event happened. Somebody close to me like passed away from a heart attack. So after that, there was like a random thing that happened. I was like drinking or something like that. And then I started feeling like really like, it was hard to breathe and blah, 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 blah. And then I started realizing like what anxiety was after that. Mm-hmm. So that was basically when I started.
I would say I was always a slightly anxious person in general. Like, I wouldn't say I was having panic attacks or anything like that, but for as long as I can remember, like, to a small child, I was always, like, a nervous, like, kind of, like, on edge kind of person.
Right. About
new situations especially. And I always had my weird, like I have a metaphobia, and I've had that since I was, like...
What's metaphobia for people that don't know?
A fear of, like, vomiting. So fear of, like, being around someone who's sick or getting sick yourself.
Yeah.
I've had that. I can remember being, like... 5 years old and one of my siblings being sick and me being like having a meltdown. So I've always had that. Mm-hmm. And most of my anxiety is probably related to that. But I don't think I had my first panic attack that I can like remember being a panic attack until I was in college.
Yeah.
So, like, in high school and stuff, I would get nervous for things, and I sometimes had, like, some anxiety or stress, but, like, it never kind of interrupted my life or made any big change like that. It just kind of was, like, an underlying feeling, and I didn't really acknowledge that it was anxiety or anything. And it wasn't until I moved away for college that I started having, like, panic attacks.
Yeah. I never really knew what a real panic attack was until I had one with, I think, Rachel at the time. And then when I went with Rachel what basically happened was I felt like really shitty. I stayed up like for 24 hours. I stayed up for 24 hours.
No, you'd had one before that.
Did I?
Yeah. Remember before we met, you said that you had a really bad panic attack and you ended up going to the doctor. It was like the night we actually met, but I didn't like know you well. You stayed at Dan's house, and then you woke up, and you said you went to the hospital.
I don't know.
Because remember you had
I went there.
you had like heart tests done.
That was
before we
right,
met.
Right.
That was before we ever met.
Yeah. So, after my initial like anxiety like thing when I was like 20, that's right. Yeah, you're right. I was like freaking out because I was like, oh my god, like what's going on? Like, because when you're anxious, your heart goes fast, right? So I immediately was like, oh, my heart's faster. This person passed away from a heart attack. Then I'm gonna be having a heart attack. And so I went to the clinic, and when you go to the clinic, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna refer you because maybe."
They do
Oh,
very
sorry.
basic.
First, what they did was they want you to have a heart monitor, and I'm like, okay. So I have a heart monitor, and I return, and they're like, everything works fine. But because we want to make sure everything's good, we're gonna send you through when you like watch The Simpsons and like Homer's running on like the treadmill test and stuff.
Stress test.
It's a stress test. Exactly that. And then they do like a monitor of your heart with like same thing that like an ultrasound, and everything tested like great, except he was like, oh, you should try to get more vitamin C, and I was like, okay. It's like, come on, what?
Okay.
So then after that I was like, okay, whatever. So the thing is that with anxiety is no matter how many doctors tell you everything's gonna be fine, you're still like anxious no matter what, right? So after that I was good for a little while, and then I went back a few times, and then I remember I had like a really bad panic attack because I stayed up like drinking all night, like for 24 hours. It was crazy. Not like drunk, but it was like just drinking. And it was for my friend's birthday. And then,
How old would you have been at this time?
it was when I met you, right?
So you would have been like what, 25?
Yeah.
26?
About that, yeah. And so then I was like freaking out. I was like, oh my god, and like I was hyperventilating, and I was like, oh no, this is it, like this is a heart attack. And then I got there, and they're like, have you ever heard of like have you ever heard of a panic attack before? And I was like, oh, that was a panic attack? And that was the first time I ever experienced like knowing what was happening.
Yeah.
And like it's crazy, it's shitty to think about. So then after that, he was like, well, you could get yourself like a muscle relaxer and all that stuff. I'm like, I hate medication. Like, I think, not that I think medication's stupid. I think just if you don't need it and you can do other things to prevent it, that's kind of like what I don't want to be taking medication every day because there's so many side effects and all that other stuff. So then I went to the clinic, and then the same person, like, because my other doctor was like, yeah, take medication. And so he like prescribed me like this like daily medication. And I was like, why is like the list of side effects so long? And he's like, well, like that's how many side effects there are. And I'm like, so one of the side effects was literally heart attack for taking this medication. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm taking this medication to prevent a heart attack. I mean, not prevent a heart attack, but because I'm anxious about heart attacks, but the medication says that you can have a heart attack, or like...
They have to put those on there.
And I'm like, what the hell? Mm-hmm. So I was like, no. I took it, and I remember I threw it in the cupboard down, like where we used to live. I tossed it in there, and I'm like, I'm going to the gym.
I'm pretty sure I threw it out when we moved. It was in there for like 5 years.
5 years, yeah. And I never opened it. I never touched it at all. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the gym. Because I read that like going to the gym like helped a ton. And sure enough, like I felt like really, really good after that. And then like periodically, like, anxiety happens. So,
usually for you, it's like, not usually, always for you, it's like related to.
Yeah, like if I ever wake up and I feel like, so sometimes if you wake up and you feel like you haven't ate the night before, or like you're hungry when you wake up and you kind of feel like that, like, oh, I'm hungry / like I feel not like lightheaded, but kind of like that. That's when I'm like, oh my God, my heart, like blah, 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 blah. And the worst is that like with it, like anxiety, like nowadays, like because I recently like this when we went on the trip, I was really bad. Like it was really really bad, and that's why like people were like, oh, how was the trip to Disney? And it was good, but I was freaking anxious the entire time, and it ruined like half the trip for me because the plane, it was like up as soon as we went on the plane, that's as soon as like my anxiety hit. And before we left, I was talking to like the doctors, and they're like, oh, you'll be okay, blah 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 blah. So anyways, we get back after, and I'm like freaking out. I'm still anxious, super heavily anxious. And I'm talking to all these doctors, and they're like, one's like medication, once again, of course. And then the other one's like, oh, you need to do coping mechanisms and therapy. And I'm like, okay. So then I'm like, well, Rachel's sister, like, she's like a nurse and all this stuff. So I was talking to her, and she's like, well, you can't have a heart attack just because. Like, you have to have high cholesterol for a long period of time. And like generally, like there's some sort of medical thing where if you're taking like medication and all of a sudden you just stop taking it, like that's not good for you. And I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, I'm fine. Like, I'm not going to have a heart attack. She's like, no, your heart can run like very, very fast for as long as you want, and you're not going to have any issues. She's like, but if your cholesterol's high, like when you have blockage, that's when you have a heart attack. I'm like, why don't these doctors tell you that? Mm-hmm. Instead of just going, oh, take medication, see you later, got to go by. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so as soon as that happened, I felt like a lot better. I mean, I still had a little bit of like trickle anxiety like left over because it was all built up and stuff. But then it kind of was like still like a little anxious doing certain things because I was like the fear for me is like being super anxious during like a live stream or something. Because like I've had very, 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 very bad anxiety while streaming, and people are like, oh, I can never even tell you're anxious.
Mm-hmm. It's because we've gotten so good at it.
Yeah, at hiding it.
Because it's so common.
Imagine,
like it happens so often for us that we just know how to like make it look like it's not happening.
Yeah, like imagine having like an internal meltdown like while people are like watching you and like trying to make it so they can't tell that you're like
it happens to me all the time.
Yeah, and like a lot of streamers like suffer with it and like just like live with it and like it's whatever. Mm-hmm. For me lately, it's been fine because like I was like, you know what, I'm gonna be fine. I'll go to the gym and all that stuff. But what I found recently that actually helped a lot was taking vitamins. Like I started taking my vitamins, and I started feeling like I start now take like a daily dose of like multivitamins, and I swear I feel amazing. Like the other day, I had like a little bit of anxiety, and it was just gone. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if like it has anything to do with vitamins, but definitely like going to the gym for me helped a shit ton. And then now like just that as well too. I mean, I'm sure like eating healthy is always good too, but for me those two have been like a thing. Mm-hmm. And just like talking to the right people, and not just for me just jumping right into medication, because I know a lot of times when people are like heavily anxious, doctors are like, you got to take that medication. You got like, even when I went to like my one and only therapist session. She was like, oh, maybe we can talk about medication. And I was there. The annoying part is that I was there for her to convince me that nothing's going to happen with a heart attack. And as soon as I got there, she's like, well, healthy people pass away from heart attacks as well, too. And I'm like, okay, that's not helping. Mm-hmm. Don't talk about that. But she was trying to be rational.
I mean, it just sucks. I'll talk about it, but I've been to therapists before.
Yeah.
It sucks is that they don't always like they're humans like everyone else, right? So like you kind of have to find the right fit.
Yeah.
Like her brand of therapy does not work for you.
No, it does not at all. Like she
seems like very much like a realist. Like she's gonna tell you like these are the facts.
Yeah.
Even if it scares you, like you need to confront the reality.
Right. Her idea was like coping with it and like breathing mechanisms and or breathing things or whatever. And I'm like, sure, but like if I'm there, and the worst is that when I got there, she was like, okay, before you start, you have to make sure that you pay me $150. I'm like, okay. I'm like, can I pay you at the end? She's like, yeah. And then like 10 minutes before the session was over, she's like, oh, let's start the payment process. Mm-hmm. And I was like, the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? Like it just angered me, and I was like, this is stupid. Mm-hmm. So, obviously like anything can happen to anybody. It's like a 1 in a million chance that you're going to win the lottery kind of thing, right? So you never know, right? But anyway, so those were my helps, and like it's helped me a ton. And like, obviously I try not to drink a lot because I think that kind of brings on anxiety. Mm-hmm. So overall anxiety sucks. But that's my story so far. Mm-hmm. You can go now. Because I just talked like a shit ton.
Okay. So like I said, I always kind of had like a general anxiety-ish feeling, but never usually panic attacks. And my anxiety is like 99% centralized around my emetophobia, which I'm always scared of getting sick or being around someone who's sick. And it kind of like permeates like everything in my life. Like if I'm about to go on vacation, I become hyper aware of like who's around me. Does anyone have germs? Has anyone been sick recently? I don't want to catch it. Like I don't like going to the gym not for the sole reason I don't like going to the gym, but also because like so many sick people touch all those things and then you touch them. And like,
Yeah.
no, I wouldn't say I'm a germaphobe.
No.
I'm just like specifically afraid of like someone sick getting me sick. If someone like we know has been sick recently, I don't want to like hang out with them for like a couple weeks until I'm sure they're not sick anymore.
Yeah.
And this doesn't apply to like colds. I'm like, whatever. Like if I have a cold, it's like I deal with it. Like I don't care. I'm just like terrified of like vomiting.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just always have been. So I always get very stressed before any important situations. Like when I was doing my master's, I moved away to London. And it was my first time like not living at home, and I was in a different relationship, and it was like not a good relationship, and we weren't very happy, so like it was stressful and stuff. And I was like in class, and it was like doing my master's, so it was super stressful. And anytime it would be like I had an important presentation, or I had to work at the same time, and it was like crazy hours, I would get like super scared that I was going to get sick, and then I was going to mess it up, and then I was going to like, you know, I had taken out this student loan, and I was like, I can't afford to like not do well at this. And I think that like made it really bad. So once I graduated, I still was living there for another year while my boyfriend at the time was finishing his schooling. And I became so anxious that I pretty much didn't leave the apartment.
Yeah.
Like I had just gotten Saber at the time, and I just sat in the apartment all day with her and didn't do anything because I was so like I would go to the grocery store and have like an actual meltdown panic attack, like sitting at the bus stop like bawling my eyes out, shaking,
Yeah.
just trying to go to the grocery store.
Like when I first met Rachel, the funny thing is Rachel says that about her past relationship, mine as well too. Basically, when I would get anxious, like the girl would basically be like, "Oh, what do you have to worry about? Like it's fine. Like you're just like making it up." I'm like, "No, like I think I'm like I don't know what's going on," and I didn't really realize that what anxiety was. And I try to tell people like, you know, I have this weird feeling. I think it's anxiety, blah blah blah. And when people don't understand what anxiety is, they'll be like, "Oh, you'll be okay. Like just don't think about it. Don't think about it." It's like that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's hard to be with somebody that doesn't understand it because they just shrug it off and go, "You'll be fine," which sometimes I do, and I feel bad for her because like sometimes I'll be fine and Rachel will be like super anxious and I'm like, "It's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay." But you kind of have to find the right words and like, you know, kind of make them forget about it, you know, like have a bunch of fireworks or something so they just like have something to look at. but it was funny because when I first met Rachel, we were like texting and all this stuff, and she was like freaking out because she didn't want to like hang out for the first time. And she was like, okay.
I'm waiting to see what his version of the story is
So-
in this so I can tell
so-
him the correct version.
So we started texting, like after we met. Rachel like made sure that she got my number. She was like adamant. She was like, I need that guy's number. And I was like, whoa,
No.
whoa, back up, baby.
No,
Back up, baby.
No, this is not true. This is not true.
So anyway, so like we text each other, and then I'm like, oh, like, you know, do you want to hang out and stuff? And she wasn't feeling well. She said she had a cold or something. And I was like, okay. So I was like, do you want to hang out? And she's like, sure. So we schedule a time, and then she doesn't hang out. And then so the next time, like the week goes again.
No, I didn't cancel. You came over to my apartment.
No, this was like, remember I asked you 3 or 4 times and eventually you said no? And then you said, yeah, sure.
I don't know.
So the first time I asked her, she said, no, unfortunately I'm feeling too sick. I can't hang out today. And I was like, oh, okay. So the plans were canceled like the last second. Second time it happened again. And I was like, okay. So then I asked one more time after like a week passed, and I said, how are you feeling now? And she's like, oh, I'm feeling better. Let's hang out. And then we were supposed to go somewhere. To hang out, and she said, "How about?" She said, "On second thought, I'm still not feeling the best." And I thought she was gonna say, "Let's not hang out," but she said, "Why don't you come to my apartment instead?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds fine." And so I got there, and but like the beauty about what we were texting before, it was she finally said, "Yeah, you."
Timeline's wrong.
What?
We hung out at my apartment for like, I think it was like a couple hours. We just like talked and whatever, and then you left.
Yeah.
And then the next time we hung out, I was coming to your house. And before I came, I had a doctor's appointment because at that time, which I haven't even gotten a chance to talk about this, I was on medication. I was weaning off of my anxiety medication.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I was like, hey, sorry, I had to come back for my doctor's appointment. And then I was like, I figure this is a good time to tell you I was at the doctor's because I have anxiety. And it was a checkup because I'm coming off my anxiety medication. I just wanted to let you know, unless that kind of like weirds you out and you don't know how to deal with anxiety. Like I figured I'd tell you early on that it's like something I deal with in my life.
And then I was like, no, like, no fucking way. I was like, me too. I was like, I fucking have anxiety too. And it was like, at that moment, I was like, this is amazing. Like, this, finally I can talk to somebody about it. She can talk to me about it. And like, we both can like kind of, because I was already anxious to go there and she was already anxious to see me. And I was like, finally, like, this is so good. And so like, it was basically like a big, like, hurrah, like we did it. You know, we finally met somebody that understands anxiety and all this stuff, and it was like really, really good. And like, it was basically like, it sounds funny, like both of us are like, yes, we both have anxiety, yeah, we can, but like at the same time, it's like that way the other person knows, right?
Yeah.
And I think at any point in a moment, like if I could switch my anxiety with you, I would, because like I don't care about puking. Frick, I'll puke every day. You know what I mean?
Great.
But anyways, if we could switch anxieties, we would be cured, because I would be like, I don't care. So it's weird that like everybody has like their own version of anxiety. You know what I mean? Like so when I first,
Let me know when I can finish my story.
oh yeah, sorry. Go on.
When you first.
When I first met Rachel and we were hanging out at her house and stuff, I remember we went to go get tea at this place, and she was like, "Can we please leave? Like, I gotta go now."
Yeah.
And so when we first met, it was basically like, because I'm an extrovert, Rachel's an introvert, and I like doing things, and she kind of likes just like, you know, kind of keeping things quiet if she can.
I like doing things.
No, she likes doing things, but
I just don't like doing things all the time,
Yeah.
every day.
and so kind of like being together helped her kind of get out of her like her shell of like being in the house all the time. So it really helped out a shit ton, because I'd be like, well, come on, let's just go here. And like, even though she was anxious, I would be there and go, okay, we can leave. And eventually now it's like we go places and she's fine.
For the most part.
For the most part, yeah. Like sometimes she'll have like that random day where you're like, oh, I feel like shit, I feel anxious, or blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a lot better. So I think having the people that are there to like understand it and like know what's up, and not just say, okay, like you're just feeling like shitty today, like it's just one of those days. Because I could tell like my ex would get very angry like when I was like I'm anxious. Like I remember one time I was gaming, and I had like a my back just started like feeling like somebody stabbed me in the back, and I was like, oh, blah blah blah, and she was like, oh, you're just anxious. And we went to the hospital, and I found out that I had a collapsed lung. So it was like one of those things where she was mad the entire time and just said, and all these doctors were like, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And then this one doctor was like, why don't we just take an x-ray just to make sure everything's okay? And she's like, and like I remember her saying, I swear to God, if there's nothing wrong with you and you're just anxious, I'm gonna be so pissed at you, I'm gonna yell at you the whole way home. And I remember she said that. And then as soon as she said that, the doctor walked into the room and said, by the way, you have a collapsed lung. We have to keep you here in the hospital. And I was like, see? And I like, the doctor left, and I'm like, see, I told you. And she's like, oh my God. And she started crying. She's like, I'm so sorry. So it's like those things that people don't understand anxiety, like, are just clueless, you know? You're up? So more of my like, you know, topic, or more of like the thing that I was just saying was that it's good to have, you know, somewhat of a relationship that like, not to say you both have to have anxiety, but as long as you know what it is, it's easier to kind of understand, to be like, okay, like it does feel shitty and blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Okay. So back, I was living in London and I was barely leaving the house, and I was feeling terrible, and I was depressed and had super anxiety. I remember I used to like start having a panic attack, and I literally wouldn't sleep all night. I would sit like shaking like on the floor for like 8 hours all through the entire night, like freaking out, until finally at like 8 o'clock in the morning I just like fell asleep from exhaustion. And at the time I was working from home, so I was like, oh, dog.
Should I pick up Saber?
I was working from home, so I didn't have to like think, because I couldn't hold a job outside of the house. Like,
Yeah.
I was so like, there was no way at that time I could have like gone into like work and done something. I just couldn't. So I found work from home. And I didn't make very much, but it was enough, like, you know, to survive at the time.
Yeah.
And it got to the point that I was just like, I can't like function like this anymore. And at the time I was probably 23 years old probably. And I was still, if you're under 25 years old in Canada, I was still considered like under my parents' coverage. So I was able to get therapy and not have to pay for it.
Right.
So until you're 25 or something like that. So I found a therapist and I started going to therapy appointments, and I did go on medication, which was, I forget what kind it was, but it was for depression and anxiety. And at the time, I 100% am like glad I did it. Like, it definitely was like what I needed, because it helped enough that I could like function. like enough that I could like go to the grocery store and like, you know, do the normal things. I still had really bad anxiety, but I could like function still. It did have like some side effects, but like nothing horrible. And then eventually like moved back home and like that relationship ended and I was just like living in an apartment on my own. And I was finally to a point where I was like, okay, I want to see like, because I probably was on it for like about a year. I was like, I want to see what it's like to try and do this without medication. But you can't just like stop. You have to like wean yourself off.
And that's the scary part about that stuff.
Yeah, like you can't just stop because like you'll get really sick. So you'll have like withdrawals essentially. So I had to like, you know, go from like one pill every day to like, you know, miss one and then like cut it down to like one every other day. And then you had to like very slowly, and then they'll like put your dosages down. So if you start at like, I don't remember what it was, say you start at like 100 milligrams, well down to like 75, then 50, then.
Yeah.
So it was like a super long process. It took like a couple months. And then finally I was off and it still was pretty bad. Like you were saying, like I didn't really like going out places because I would have panic like when I was out, and the fear was always like, what sucks about my anxiety, it's like a double whammy, is that like when Travis gets anxious, your heart rate increases.
Yeah.
When I get anxious, I feel nauseous. So that is my fear, is being sick. So like my anxiety literally causes what I'm anxious of.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. It's so frustrating. So it's like I would get anxious, I would feel nauseous, and then the nausea would make me anxious, and then the anxious would make me, it's just like an endless circle.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just like lots of hard work and like years of like, you know, being pushed and pushing myself to try and do things more and more and more. And like it slowly got better, but that doesn't mean that like I'm 100%. Like in the winter, I struggle a lot.
I think the winter sucks because you're like always indoors and like you're like, what
For
the hell?
me, it's cold and flu season, which is like, that's causes me a lot of stress. And it's just, yeah, you're super dark outside. I get like sad, like seasonal affective disorder. So like you just feel like blah in the winter because it's so dark. Yeah, for sure. So that like makes it worse. And then I just start like focusing on like how I feel instead of like, you know, in the summer it's so like I usually feel like pretty great in the summer. Like you wake up and it's sunny and there's things to do, and like especially this past summer, like we could go swimming, we could like, I had a great time. I really can't remember like feeling that anxious.
No.
And then this winter I've just been like kind of a mess.
Well, that's the thing, is like when I was like, okay, I'm like blah 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 blah, you know, like leading up to Christmas, and I'm like, why am I so anxious? And I'm like, I think it's like this every year.
Yeah,
because like
every
this
year,
is the
and I
year,
kind of forget how bad it is until it happens.
Like this is because like Christmas is always a time that the person that I talked about like passed away or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I never really associate that with that, but I'm like, oh yeah, it's literally on Christmas. Then you have like to meet up with all your family, you have to make sure everyone's happy, you have to try to like plan for New Year's, and it's just like all this shit all at once. And I think it was just, you know, a whole ball of wax that kind of like why the anxiety was so bad. But I definitely think that now that I know, like it's really odd, but like I said, like taking like a daily multivitamin has honestly like freaking like helped a shit ton. And my mom was always said like, oh, you know, you gotta have magnesium, blah 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 blah. And like I started reading like online like all the benefits about vitamins and anxiety, like, and how, you know, people would say things, well, if you take, you know, medication, like that's what kind of induces like the stuff that like, you know, kind of helps with anxiety and stuff. Because the thing about going to the gym is it helps with it releases like a thing in your brain that like helps you kind of, you know, not care about anxiety, like kind of, what's it called again? Endorphins, yes. And so that's why people say like exercise is great, but the thing is that for me is if I'm anxious and my heart's going fast, I'm not going to go run because I'm going to feel like shit, you know what I mean? Because I'm gonna, like, my heart's going to go faster. But now that I'm like that, I'm doing all that stuff. So I think like, you know, if you're out there and you're anxious, for me, like, you know, I don't know if what your kind of, you know, coping mechanisms or whatever you use, but for me, I think that definitely try everything else. I'm not saying if you're already on medication, sure, like for sure, continue to do it, because if that works for you, that works for you. I'm sure you guys have probably already tried all your things, but for me, my cures were going to the gym, getting a gym membership, and just going. The thing about people always like fear about going to the gym, and I think you should never fear about going to the gym. It's easier to go with somebody that can push you, and then once you're in that routine, you feel like almost like Imagine was like somebody's like, oh, did you eat breakfast today? And you're like, oh shit. Like that's kind of like the feeling that not going to the gym feels like. If you don't go to the gym, you feel like, oh damn it, I missed breakfast yesterday, and I have to have it tomorrow. Like that sort of feeling happens, and you know that like it makes you feel good. Plus, obviously, like you get exercise and all that stuff. So I think for me, like definitely going to the gym or some sort of exercise helps a lot. The reason why I say go in the gym is because when you're paying for a gym membership, you kind of feel like you have not an obligation, but you're like, I'm paying for it, I got to use it. You know what I mean? And so like that was my help. And then obviously like recently I just started taking vitamins and it seemed to help quite a lot. And the big thing is for anxiety is just like knowing that nothing bad is going to happen. It's hard to kind of like feel that. The shitty part is getting over the fact like we're supposed to go to TwitchCon next year, and I'm like, God damn, I'm like, what if I'm anxious the entire time? You know, and like now I know.
Sorry. As a person with anxiety, that's just like part of your life.
Yeah, and then now
you kind of just have to accept that, like, yeah, I might go and I might be anxious the entire time, but like, I'm still gotta experience life.
Exactly.
Like if you can't control it, then just don't let it. Just don't control it. Just do it anyway.
And like now, and like so, one of the things that happened recently was before I left on the trip, my mom was like, and I swear my mom can be like a very big anxiety inducer, like all the time. Like before I go on the trip, she knew I was anxious, and the words that she said was, remember, you have to get health insurance, because I read a story that somebody had a very bad thing happen to them and they had to pay $160,000 when they were there. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, thank you. Yeah. You couldn't have just said, have a great trip, I can't wait to hear all about it. Mm-hmm. You know? And so that immediately went into my brain, and I was like, if I have anything to do with my heart, or if I have like any kind of medical thing, or if I like have to call 911 for some reason, I have to pay a lot of money.
The thing is that this wouldn't happen because through my work we have travel insurance.
Yeah, and like so when I went to the therapist, she's like, "Why would you even think about that? You have travel insurance. Like the thing that
we have health insurance.
Yeah, that thing that happened to that person was like a 1 in a million chance that he didn't actually have any insurance at all. Yeah, and I was like, you're right. So like. The thing is like sometimes people can say things that they want you to be cautious, because obviously parents want you to be cautious, but in turn it like triggers something else. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's like you always have to be worry about like if somebody tells you they're anxious, and they're anxious about spiders being in the room or something like that. Don't tell them to put spider traps in your room, because that's just going to make them think more about spiders. You know what I mean? Like it's stuff like that if somebody around you has anxiety, try to realize. Maybe avoid talking about certain things that can trigger their anxiety.
Also realize that like they're very aware that it's not a rational fear.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can't help it.
We're not stupid.
Like I'm very aware that my fear is irrational and doesn't make any sense, but that doesn't make it not there. Like I can tell myself 1,000 times, like, you have nothing to worry about. This is crazy. Why are you afraid of this? And it still will be a fear. Like it is what it is.
Yeah. So what's your kind of like
coping?
Not coping, but like what's your kind of like helping thing? Like that's helping.
I find that if I have to, like take a step back and like let myself. I get very caught up in things. I feel like, especially like, I've been quite anxious the past few weeks, and I think it's because I'm doing so much. Like I have to like. Be like, you know what, I need to take a day or like do an activity or something that lets me be calm, because if I'm doing too much and I start getting stressed about this, okay, well, what's the next thing I have to do is this, what's the next thing I have to do is this, and then I start getting, and it like snowballs. So I definitely have to like remember to let myself like do something that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Like if I start forcing myself to do too many things, then it'll just get worse and worse and worse, and I'll just like have like a break where I like, have a complete meltdown, panic attack, and I lose it.
Yeah.
So, and then that can't, I mean, that's okay if that happens, but the struggle is that like, if it happens at work or something, then there I am at work in the middle of a meeting with a customer and I'm, having a meltdown. Yeah. And you have to pretend like nothing's happening. So it's quite stressful. So, for example, yesterday we, all our friends was inviting everyone over to play board games, and I was like, you know what, like,
just have a day.
I'm not going to go. Like, I have to say no to things and be like, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to, like, do a painting. I'm going to watch, like, something that just makes me feel calm and happy, because if I'd forced myself to go, I probably would have just continued to be anxious.
Yeah. Whereas, like, for me, I feel like not that I need the distraction, but I feel like sometimes it's better to have a distraction for me. So I always, like, try to do things and stay busy.
Yeah. And I mean, I still do things, but I do things that make me feel calm.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I'll get myself, like, a meal I really like, or I'll cook something, or I'll, like, do some therapeutic cleaning, or something like that, where it's just me. Because, like we said, I'm more of an introvert.
Yeah.
So if I just keep forcing myself to do extrovert things, sure, it's good. Like, on a normal day.
Yeah.
But if I'm super anxious and I keep forcing myself to do things that make me anxious, to a certain extent, it reaches a point where it's going to make me go in the other direction.
Yeah.
And I have to like go back and like recharge my batteries for a while.
I think a lot of the things that help is continuously like breaking down that wall of I'm anxious, I'm always going to be anxious. Because like for me, it's like recently I've been do you want to close the door? So the heater was like, hey, you're cold down there? Okay, let's turn it on. And the heater's like super loud. But for me, I find that breaking down like that like pyramid of like, okay, I'm, you know, I know why I'm anxious, 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 I'm gonna be fine, I'm gonna be fine, I'm gonna be fine. And eventually, like, especially now, like I'm gonna be fine. Like no matter what happens, everything's gonna be good. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And like it's just getting back into that groove of stuff, because once you kind of like are anxious, and like for me, once like 6 doctors all told me like you're gonna be fine. I'm like, okay, let's rationalize this and think, okay, if I'm an IT person, if 6 people told you, hey, your computer's working perfectly fine, chances are your computer's working fine. Mm-hmm. And 6 doctors said, Travis, everything's fine. They've all taken my blood pressure. They all said everything looks great, blah, blah, blah. You're perfectly fine. So it's like one of those things that's like, just keep telling yourself it's going to be okay. And like, it's not going to be like an overnight thing. But I think eventually down the road, like, things can get better. Yeah.
I also find that, like, finding the thing that makes you feel more comfortable is good. Like, for me, I always plan, if I can feel like I have an exit strategy, it makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
Like, if I can find some, like, a bit of control over the situation, usually it, like, relieves a bit of my anxiety. Like, if I'm having a day where I'm feeling, like, super anxious and I'm starting to feel nauseous and we're about to go to, like, someone's birthday. Mm-hmm. If I can be like, I'm going to drive and I'm not going to bring anyone with me, that way that if I want to leave, like on a moment's notice, say like the worst scenario in my head happens and I'm sick or someone else is sick, I can just get in my car and leave.
Yeah.
Like I have nothing that, and usually that's enough to get me like, to be like, okay, I have control of the situation. Even if the worst case scenario happens, I'm fine. And 99.99% of the time, I never have to use that exit strategy.
A lot of the times is
a
lot of the times it's not letting your anxiety control what you do too. Because like,
yeah, but
I think
to a certain extent, it's going to.
Yeah, I think it depends.
I think it's finding ways to like minimize and make yourself feel like you have some control.
Yeah, like it's kind of crazy, but like not crazy, but I know a lot of streamers don't like streaming with a webcam. And it's a lot of it from what I'm hearing is like from anxiety. People are just like, oh, I don't want people to see me. Like, what if I don't want people to kind of judge me and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff on streaming is kind of like scary because, sometimes people will look at my stream and they'll be like, oh, are you okay today? Is everything okay? And I'm like, are they saying that because like I look sad because I'm anxious, or not sad, but I look like anxious? Mm-hmm. And internally I'm thinking all these things, but then I still have to like act like nothing's happening and I'm okay. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And so it's one of those things where it's hard to, it's a lot of work to have, not a lot of work, but it's a lot to build yourself up to, like, especially like the week of me being anxious, pressing like go live and being like, okay, I'm going to be stuck in this position. I can't just stop my stream at any point in time because everyone's going to go, is Travis okay?
Well, you could.
I could, right? And the thing is that like, then eventually I'm like, you know what? Who cares? Like, I'm going to be fine. Like, everything's going to be great. And sure enough, like, I've been fine after that. Like, I had a few days of streaming where I was just super anxious. I got off the stream and I was just like, I'm so tired, But then I realized I'm like, this is just, because of the shitty weather outside, all that other stuff. And like I said, eventually I just kind of slowly got back to my normal routine. And I think like people talk about all the time, they're like, oh, I got to take some time from streaming and I got to just like, just regather my thoughts and stuff like that. And like, sometimes like that, like I think, okay, maybe I should take today off and stuff. But then I'm like, if I take today off, then I'm going to want to take tomorrow off.
Not necessarily.
No, I know for me, it's not necessarily taking a day off just to like hang out. It's because of anxiety is what I'm referring to. So for me, it's like if I give into anxiety and I prevent it from me like streaming or hanging out with friends, then the next day I'm going to be like, I'm still anxious. Because that's what was happening for me. I was like, well, I'm anxious. Maybe I should not stream today. But then instead of letting the anxiety control me, I just went ahead and I streamed and I felt great. You know what I mean? So
see, that's how you know that there's like no one set way to deal with it.
No, exactly.
Because like for me, that would just make it worse.
Exactly.
Like for me, I have to sometimes take a step back and be like, my body is telling me something and maybe I need to slow down for a little bit. And then a lot of times the next day I'll wake up and I'll be like, oh, thank God I like let myself relax. Now I feel like so much less stressed.
Yeah.
And I can get back to like my life. Whereas for you, it's like it'll make it worse for you.
Yeah, because I know that for me, if I give in, then I'm like, you know what I mean? Then I'm just giving into the anxiety, and at that point, the anxiety's taking over and doing everything that it wants to do.
Whereas for me, like, I can picture in my head times where I've been like out somewhere and like completely freaking out and like definitely needing to leave, and I've made myself stay. And then I get so exhausted because I have like a 4-hour long panic attack where I'm just like on edge for 4 hours. And then the next day I wake up and I feel like crap. Like I just feel exhausted. I feel sick because I've just like stressed my body out so much.
Yeah.
Whereas if I had just like removed myself from that situation, the next day I would have felt fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, what am I really losing? Like, you know, an hour of hanging out with friends
Yeah.
versus like ruining my whole entire next day.
Right.
It's just different, right?
It is different, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that like everybody has to have that, you know, that person that's there to be like, okay, hey, this is happening, and understanding what's going on instead
Yeah.
of just being like, oh, well, I can't relate to it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which you're gonna have. Like sometimes people are like, hey, you know, my husband has anxiety, but my wife doesn't have anxiety. You know, I just try to like pick, you know, try to give, don't, if you have extreme anxiety and the other person has no anxiety at all, try to explain to them like what it feels like rather than just being like, I have anxiety. Because I think a lot of the times is like people don't get it. You know, people are just like we have friends that have never experienced anxiety, and I'm like, dude, I look up to you. You know, like that's
I wish.
crazy.
It must
You
be
know,
nice.
imagine
What
not,
is your life
imagine
like?
like not stressing about anything. and
Imagine
just-
going through a full day without ever like having those thoughts.
It's just crazy. So, and I think that like, you know, if you take the time to go and be like, hey, imagine like you felt like this or something like that, and like they kind of start to understand like how you feel, then it's
And maybe they don't
Yeah.
understand,
yeah.
but I mean,
but it just definitely does
if you
help.
don't have a lot of anxiety, and I guess just try and like have an open mind about if someone's telling you, like, even if it sounds crazy,
Yeah.
that they're probably telling you the truth, and like, you know, just try and be as understanding and ask them. I think that a good thing to do would be to ask them, like, when they're not anxious, when they're feeling normal, just be
Yeah.
like, hey, the next time this happens, like, what can I do or say that would make you feel better? Because they know more than anyone else, like, what they need in that situation. Whether it's, like, distract me, or, like, give me a hug, or, like, you know, put on a move, like, whatever it is. So that the next time it happens, you don't have to feel, like, scared to say the wrong thing or do the wrong
Yeah.
thing.
The thing is that we live in a good situation, in a better situation, I should say, because healthcare here is free. So we can talk to as many doctors as we want and be fine. Yeah. Where I feel like if I was in the States or a country that didn't even have like any healthcare whatsoever,
Can you imagine how many medical bills we would have?
I don't even know. You know what I
The
mean?
amount
Like,
of times that we've gone to the
and
doctors.
that's what scares me is that like I feel like not to say like Canadians like have it easy in that sense, but it's kind of one of those things where if I was in America, like if I was in the States, I would have to just be like whatever and just get over it. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of like maybe, you know, not to say like not to say a better situation to be in, but I'm saying that like sometimes you know, I feel bad because like people are like, yeah, I have to pay all this money to go. I'm like, I couldn't even imagine that. Like, I don't know, it's just crazy.
The only thing I've ever had to pay money for would be like a prescription, and it's
Yeah.
not even a full amount. It's like, you know, $5.
I know, it makes me feel bad for all the people that are
crazy.
like, you know, but I think all in all,
We're
it's just,
definitely lucky.
we are. I think in a situation like this, you know, we just want to talk about anxiety, tell you our side of the story, so you guys know that, you know, even if I'm streaming and I look okay, you know, sometimes I'm anxious, but I mean, you know, lately I've been fine. It's not to the point where I'm gonna like freak out and, you know, run away or anything like that. But I think that like,
might.
yeah, I think in some cases it's, you know, it's always good to know that somebody, you know, that you don't even think that could have anxiety definitely, you know, has it as well too. Especially if you guys can relate to it as well too.
And if any of you go to TwitchCon and I freak out,
Yeah,
it's not because I don't like you.
yeah, it's just because you're anxious.
It's just because I'm anxious.
But I mean, for me, these things have been working really, really well. Actually, I've had like the past 2 D&D sessions, I was like anxious the entire time and like on edge.
That
And
happens
it's
to me sometimes.
very, very, very hard to pay attention to what Rob is saying when I'm super anxious, because I'm like anxious and then Rob's talking to me and I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying, you know. So I have to kind of catch up and stuff. But the last session I felt great, and I think it's just like I said. I think a lot of it is to do with, you know, getting over this crappy like winter. And I've always, every time it's winter, I'm like, Rach, we should live in California. I'm like, let's just go to California. She's
I'm
like,
we can never afford that.
she's
We're
like,
not.
you know, we can't do that,
And
right?
we also just can't.
I know. So, and it's just because, like I said, it's shitty here. You don't go outside. You don't have the sun. Blah blah blah. The sun makes you happy. All that other stuff. So it's like, now that I'm taking my vitamins and like going and working out, I'm feeling like really really good. So I'm very happy. And I think eating too. Like eating, like if I don't eat for a while, then I start to feel kind of like, you know, not anxious, but kind of like hangry, anxious kind of thing. So. But yeah, we just wanted to kind of have a little podcast, kind of talk about it and kind of give you our sides of the story so you guys can relate to it or talk about maybe like what you think about it or kind of, you know, stuff like that. So have anything else to talk about? No. But anyways, guys, that is our episode 10. So we've done 10 episodes of podcasts.
Grab that dog.
Saber, come here. Saber is literally sleeping and stretching. So we've done 10 episodes. Guys, thank you so much for honestly listening. If you're still listening to the podcast and supporting on Patreon, I appreciate it a ton. Honestly, like it means a lot to us because you know, we want this to be kind of like a thing that we continue to do more and more. So
hopefully, as we kind of tweak the format of it, it gets better.
Yeah,
Not that I think it's been bad, but
No.
I think that we definitely have room to grow.
One thing I want you guys to do, if you guys feel free, is comment in the Discord channel. Be like, hey Travis, we like the podcast, but maybe you could do this different, or maybe this, or whatever. We want to keep the podcast because, for us podcasts, I don't really listen to them that much, but I know like how they are. Like obviously some podcasts are around, different topics, like specifically like you watch like murder documentaries or listen to murder podcasts. Sometimes I'll listen to like IT podcasts and stuff. So most podcasts can be whatever you want. And we just wanted it to be like kind of like a neutral thing where we just talk about random stuff. Doesn't matter what it is. So it's always different every time. Because if we just only talked about like, Legos or something like that, you guys might be like, I don't care about Legos.
I also know nothing about Legos.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, so next week we will be here on next Sunday with another podcast. And I appreciate all the support, guys. Seriously, thank you so much. And we will see you guys.
So do I.
And so does Rachel. We will see you guys in the next one. And Saber is waving goodbye. If you guys want to see the video, make sure that you guys check out on Patreon. If you're just listening to Spotify for free, that is great as well too. But if you ever want to see the video, make sure to check out Patreon for that. In the future, possibly, I know that we talked about maybe releasing the video for free on YouTube after like a period of like maybe 2 or 3 months. So we might end up doing that. So if you guys are curious what I'm talking about, if you're listening for free right now, you don't unfortunately get the video, but I was thinking that about 2 months after we do the episode, we might air it on YouTube, which we did for the first episode. So Patreon will basically get the episode instantly. There wouldn't be any delay, but then about a month or two after, we would release the episode on YouTube. I haven't decided that for sure yet. I'm going to talk to some of the Patreons, see how they feel about that, and kind of go from there. But anyways, guys, we will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks again, guys, for listening to our anxiety session. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you. Bye.